In the whipping, I'm whipping the soul out it. Chin the tone when I'm festing like Pilates. Why you frontin', you act like you somebody. Keep a trail in the ville, how I go by it. I was stuck in the rut, I was nobody. I've been looking for something to go body. There's an art to the hustle like yo got it. Kid got a kick back and hit like a new shotty. In the whipping, I'm whipping the soul out it. Chin the tone when I'm
Yo, what's going on, Titan Clan? It is your boy King Tinex here, back with another video, and you guys can already tell from the title that Deku being Aries' big brother here in this what if. Basically, what if Deku was Aries' big brother? Well, that ended up winning the votes. It ended up getting like the most comments. The one that came in second place was what if Deku was the son of Ra's al Ghul. So I'm going to be doing that next. That's basically going to be one of the next what ifs I plan on doing. The others I also am thinking about doing, but those I'll save for later. Now, a couple of you guys are probably wondering how exactly what if like this would work. So, well, you see, I was talking to Purple Heart Anime about the topic and the original plans. yeah, they were yeeted out the window. But a plan was formed though, or like a very kind of vague plan, you could say. Look, it's fairly obvious that Izuku would be Aries' older brother here, but here's the kicker. Izuku would have actually been the older half brother of Aries here. No, they're not like full-blooded siblings, they're only half. Deku was born a good amount of years before Eri. The name of Izuku's mother was Inko Midoriya, but his father wasn't Hisashi Midoriya here. No. Well, not the biological father anyways. Inko was in a relationship with another man before Hisashi came into the picture, and they ended up becoming intimate. The next thing you know, a baby with hair as white as the snow and eyes as red as a ruby was born. Interestingly enough, he had a baby horn poking out from the left side of his head. Inko didn't really know the meaning behind the horn, but she didn't really care. She loved her child either way. Her fiance honestly didn't want to keep the baby though. He felt that the two of them were too young and unprepared to be raising a kid. They weren't even married yet. He wanted to put the boy up for adoption, but Inko refused. He called off the wedding, but Inko stuck with Izuku. Eventually, she found a new man in the form of Hisashi. He was a bit surprised to meet Izuku for the first time, but he accepted him. He ended up marrying the boy's mother after a year of the two knowing each other. For about 2 years, they lived a pretty happy life. Sure, they had some mishaps from time to time, but let's face it, what family didn't? There is no such thing as a perfect family. Life was good up until Izuku's quirk awakened. On his 4th birthday, Izuku experienced a pain in his forehead area. More specifically around his horn. He was crying out in pain as soon as he woke up. Inko and Hisashi immediately rushed into his room to see what was going on. Inko grabbed Izuku and held him in her arms, trying to settle him down, but it wasn't working. Not in the slightest. Instead, when Inko ended up getting into contact with Izuku, his quirk began to take effect on her. Hisashi Masashi was horrified at what he was witnessing. The boy that he grew to know as his own son was turning his wife into a corpse. She was aging rapidly. Her once emerald green hair became gray, and her skin decrepit. It wasn't too long before she became a husk of her former self. A skeleton was now in her place. Izuku was terrified at what he had done as well, but when he looked up at his stepfather for some form of support in this situation, Hisashi showed none of the softness he once had. Izuku tried crying out for Hisashi, but the man looked down at him with disgust. You, you killed her! Hisashi yelled. Izuku tried to make his way to Hisashi with tears in his eyes, but Hisashi walked backwards from him. He didn't want any association with this kid any longer. He left the room and made his way out to the apartment. He called the police as well in order to inform them of what happened. He knew they wouldn't arrest the 4-year-old, even though he hardly saw Izuku as one anymore. That wouldn't have been the same story for him though if people assumed he was the cause of his wife's death. It didn't take too long for the police to arrive, thank goodness, and remove that Spawn from his apartment. They put tape around the area where Inko took her last breath and began taking pictures of the evidence too. Hisashi had relinquished any and all rights to the child since he had no desire to be in the boy's life any longer. He was traumatized by what he saw. He wanted to grow old with Inko, but that brat ruined it all for him. He despised Izuku for the chaos he brought into his life, even if it wasn't intentional. Izuku's life after this wasn't all that great either though. He was put into an orphanage shortly after that whole incident, and he was tested by the doctors for his quirk. Seeing what the boy did to his mother made the doctors hesitant of approaching him though. The doctors eventually decided to give him a pair of gloves and a couple of insects to test his quirk on. The gloves were to make sure he didn't accidentally touch one of them while his quirk was active. Izuku was reluctant in using his quirk after what he did to Inko, but he gave in soon enough. He had a caterpillar crawl onto one of his bare hands, and the result was interesting. When he used his quirk on the caterpillar, it began to rapidly develop until it went through all the stages of its metamorphosis in what was basically seconds. Izuku, seeing the now butterfly in his hands, tried to stop his quirk, but it was difficult. The doctor swooped in and contained the butterfly in a jar while they brought in the assistance of Eraserhead in order to erase his quirk. The man genuinely didn't want to be here, but it was a necessity. Honestly, he wanted to go wrap himself up in his sleeping bag, but he couldn't do that right now with the current circumstances revolving around this kid. One look from Aizawa was all it took to deactivate Izuku's quirk, which he was immensely grateful for. Well, both Izuku and his doctors. They ran a couple of more experiments on the boy until they discovered that Izuku's quirk allowed him to accelerate the aging process of living things. At least that's what it appeared to be anyways. They weren't sure if it only worked on humans, other animals, and insects though. They were curious to know if it worked on plants too. The doctors wanted to keep testing Izuku, but Aizawa immediately put an end to it, establishing the fact the boy had gone through enough and didn't need to be their little science experiment. He could understand the first couple of experiments, but it was getting ridiculous now. Plus, his eyes were extremely dry. With all the testing done with, Izuku, who was wearing a pair of gloves now, left to go back to the orphanage. Years would go by with Izuku getting bullied by others for what his quirk was capable of. He remembered wanting to be a hero, but anytime he would mention wanting to be one, the kids would just laugh at him and bring up how his quirk was villainous over and over again. It was frustrating to Izuku. He fought back one day, but he was immediately ganged up on. They all used their quirks on him while he was practically helpless. In all of the conflict, he was forced to slip off one of his gloves and grab one of the boys by the wrist. He activated his quirk and began to have them suddenly age rapidly. They screamed in horror as their body was unable to keep up with their development. They collapsed from the pain and were on top of Izuku. He pushed him off while looking at the other boys. He lifted himself up and got into a bit of a fighting position before the other kids just looked at their friend. Izuku just turned him into a grown man, but they looked to be malformed. The kids ran away from Izuku in fear of what he'd do to them as well. They were calling him a monster, a freak of nature. The people meant to take care of them at the orphanage were alarmed at the sight and called 110, basically Japan's equivalent of 911 for my Americans. And for those who are not from America, basically just imagine who you call. Basically imagine the number you would call for the police, medical people, all of that. That's Japan's equivalent. I definitely looked this up. I'm not kidding. In order to get medical support for the kid that was affected by Izuku's quake. As for Izuku, he was apprehended by the police. He was around 8 at this time. They took him in for questioning and realized that the orphanage he was staying at wasn't necessarily the best environment for him. They knew he wasn't lying because he was 8. These kids were terrible liars around this time, and they could point out the holes in them rather easily. Izuku's story sounded genuine. His story sounded way more genuine than any 8-year-old could muster up though. So that's why they ended up believing him. They looked through potential foster parents for the kid, but couldn't really find anyone suitable enough for a child like Izuku. Well, all except one. Shota Aizawa was an interesting candidate. He was more of an underground hero, not as well known to the public, and stayed out of the spotlight as often as possible. He had also apparently met this Izuku boy before. Granted, it was like 4 years ago, but he could prove to be a bit of an ally here. His quirk served as a good counter towards Izuku's quirk as well, so he could probably serve as a bit of a role model for the kid. That was what was going through their minds at the time, and even if he wasn't all that interested in becoming a parental figure for Izuku, he probably had useful connections. At least one or two of them would be willing to adopt Izuku. When Aizawa was called into the room, and informed of the situation, he groaned in annoyance. Another brat he would have to keep an eye on. He didn't outright refuse to take care of Izuku though. Instead, he informed them of the fact he wouldn't be the only one raising the troubled boy, since he knew for a fact he wasn't the greatest parental figure. That was fine in the police's eyes though. And simply put, when Aizawa did end up going home with Izuku, he would have probably just ended up sleeping on the couch, just passed out exhausted from the day. And the next day, when he was required to go to UA to teach one of his classes for the day, of course, he failed to take account for Izuku. Well, simply put, he realized that, oh, wait a minute, this kid is with me now. So Aizawa would actually end up having to bring Izuku to work with him. And some of the students would end up getting to meet Izuku, but those kids aren't really important. The ones that are important here are the fact that while bringing Izuku to school, the first people to acknowledge him are Midnight, Present Mike, and Recovery Girl. Those were the three people to immediately notice Izuku's presence right next to Aizawa. And you guys already know what kind of thoughts would be going through their heads. But that's all I have for right now. Sorry that this seems to be kind of short compared to my more recent videos that have been like an hour long, 30 minutes long, all of that. It's just I'm going through some work with school, basically exams coming up, all that good stuff. So that's basically what's been my focal point. That's basically what I've been focusing the most on. Not really YouTube as much, although I'm still trying to make some content for you guys. But yeah, that's all I have for right now. And so just remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Especially with the fact that we are so close to hitting 2K. I'm trying to see if we can reach 2K before the end of the month. And then we can release the what if about we can release this what if Eren was Chainsaw Man, and I have some plans for that story. That story is gonna be amazing. But yeah, I got nothing else to say. Until next, out.